Thanks, guys, for joining me today so that we can just talk a little bit further about where our nation is as a whole. I just want to ask, I'll just put the question out there and say, what did you feel when you were standing in front of your television screen and you saw George Floyd laying on the pavement as they were really squeezing the life of this man out of him? Anybody want to?
Let me start. As you were saying that, it just brought back the memory of the first time, of course, and I had to adjust reality because you can see things in movies and play acting, but to have to adjust your mind to the reality that actually took place. It wasn't staged. It wasn't in Hollywood. It was on the street of a city in America. It wasn't for third world country. It was here, and just it took several times for me to have to. I saw it. I knew it existed. I knew it happened, but having to adjust your reality till this is in your face, and it's actual. And it took a day or two actually for it to settle in that this is real. This is not just something I saw on television as a movie and kept moving. This is reality.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Bishop, I'm going to come behind you and say, I felt a myriad of emotions that day. And the only thing that I could really equate those emotions to were the stages of grief and loss. The first thing that I felt was denial, because as I watched it, I said, there is no way that I am experiencing, watching this man on television or on my smartphone, having the life literally snuffed out of him. There's no way that this is real.
In front of the world.
In front of the world. I was in denial. And then came the anger. Yeah. I was furiated. I was upset. I was hot because I couldn't believe that an officer would hear this man begging and pleading for his life with all of these bystanders around, individual citizens saying he can't breathe, check his pulse, you're on his neck, you're causing him to die. I was angry. And then came the bargaining. And the bargaining piece came into play as I was saying to myself, if only someone would have stopped him, if only someone would have come to Officer Chauvin and intervened. But then, of course, I knew that really wasn't plausible. You couldn't really do that because then your life is threatened.
Absolutely.
You know, you're going to be, held accountable for assaulting an officer or whatnot. So I knew that couldn't happen.
I put myself in that place as the guy that was filming it, asking myself, what would I do?
Exactly.
Would I jump in and risk my life? Mm-hmm. Or am I going to stand by and just talk about it?
Right.
It's crazy.
And after the bargaining came, then came a feeling of depression, a feeling of worry, a feeling of, and I don't want to get too emotional, but a feeling of hopelessness. Yeah. Because I started saying, I have 6 brothers. I have a black husband. I have a black son. Is this ever going to change? That could have been any one of them, an uncle, a father, just a black male associate.
Yeah.
And then the acceptance, but the acceptance was a little different because, of course, I'm not oblivious to the racial injustices that are taking place and have been for centuries in our country. But it was solidified. And I had to say to myself, this country, this is not the United States of America. Yes, we are united geographically. Our states connect, but culturally speaking and racially speaking, we are divided. And Chris Cuomo, he said it best. He said, America is a tale of two cities. It's a city of the majority and a city of the minority. And I'm still processing because it was traumatic.
Yeah.
Part of me wishes that I didn't even see it. But I can't get that image out of my mind. I can't get his words begging for his mama.
Yeah.
I can't get the image out of my mind of him even urinating on himself.
Yeah.
You know, things like that. It was horrifying.
Yeah. I think when he cried for his mama, the mother in every mother around the world leaned in.
Right.
That was very, very, very painful. Somebody else?
Yeah, I guess for me, losing my father this year, watching Ahmaud Arbery on film being gunned down, and to see this, I was just overwhelmed with sorrow and disbelief, just in sorrow. And immediately, like Talisha referenced, I'm a black man in America, and it matters not where I'm fixated in the culture. Doesn't matter what side of town I live on. The plight is that there are still some people who still look at me as not enough. And I'm faced with that plight and that reality. And I think the most touching thing for me out of it all is his friend Stephen Jackson, who was trying to help him rehabilitate his life, you know, push his dreams, push his goals, and to see a life cut short because of an excessive use of power.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that just makes me angry, I mean, I got angry at one point. It's just the excessiveness of power. It's the misuse, the misappropriation of power that says, how is it that we still have to deal with people misusing power?
Yeah.
When we're supposed to protect and serve, we are brutally, horrifically punishing people. And I'll say this, for being black. And it's horrific. And I'm still yet, like Talisha said, I think I said it before, I probably should have never watched the video. Because in the midst of my life, my day, in the midst of everything that's going on, while I'm, it just plays. When I lay down at night and I close my eyes, I see that image. It sticks with me for some reason. I can watch a movie, I can watch something else. I watch a movie of people shooting and killings and different things like that, snipers and all that kind of stuff, shows, Homeland, all this kind of stuff. But for some reason, I can't get that image out of my head.
Yeah. I don't think any of us that have actually seen it ever will. It's very painful. Joseph?
I didn't let myself watch it. I saw the picture. Social media, you know, the way your timeline goes, you can see an image, and I knew the outcome. I'm not a suspense person, so if I'm watching a show like Homeland, I might just pull up Wikipedia to read a spoiler because I don't want you to drag me through unfurling this story. And I didn't want to drag my mental health into a space of the recurring trauma that is police brutality. And Pastor Brady has a phrase, and I've heard Mark use it too, that, you know, we say distance distorts. And I remember when we started the war on terror, and it just seemed like how do you fight a concept? Like, how do you fight a strategy? How do you fight an idea? If terrorism lives in the heart of people, as a citizen, not as a military expert or not as a strategist, but just as a citizen, I was trying to consider, how do you fight terror? And I was miffed on the entire process of it until I saw a decapitation on YouTube. And it was something about seeing a man's life leave his body, his eyes go dim, his vitality shrink to nothing, his presence turn to absence, that made me understand that if we never won or if we never engaged, that this problem would live forever. And so it's a concept and a construct. It's an idea that lives in the heart and minds of people, but it was something that had to be attacked. And there was something, as Travis and Talisha have said, Bishop said, something leveling where any denial you had about waiting for facts, or the way that the media or the police even sometimes try to release the record of this person, slander their name posthumously, so that now we believe, well, maybe he wasn't a great person, so maybe he did deserve this. There was something about that image that was undeniable. And I saw the greatest analogy I saw. I did a talk last night with dads, and someone commented that George was the rock that was thrown at the Goliath of racism. Racism has taunted this country. Racism has stood in opposition to this country. And even us that have a covenant have some way and somehow in some form or fashion been a party to it or a victim of it. And God used, even if he was just a stone, even if he was a man that we, because of his background, had all of these different paths that he chose, there was something about that moment that has changed, I think, the course of our future, rather. I think this is a historic moment, but I didn't let myself watch it because I knew that I didn't want to relive that trauma, one, but I also knew that when I saw the picture, that it brought the concept of racism, just like terror, from an ideology into reality.
Yes.
I hear you, Joseph. I had to force myself to watch it. Sometimes when I'm watching TV and I know, I feel like what's getting ready to happen, I have the luxury of turning the channel real quick, and then I'll come back when I think that it's over. Or if somebody is getting ready to embarrass themselves on television, I sit in my bed and I do this until it's over, or I turn the volume down. I have a tendency to do that because I don't want to be embarrassed. I'm embarrassed for them. I have had a tendency in the past too to know what has happened because the news tells us, right, or their version of it, and scroll past a video because of what I'm feeling. And here recently, I find myself forcing myself and challenging myself to not scroll past it. If there is a full version, to sit there and sit in that moment and watch the full version so that I can see things for myself. And no matter how uncomfortable it is, no matter how heartbreaking, how just in awe I am in what I'm taking in, but to be in that moment and not to just know that it happened, but to see it with my own eyes.
Yeah. So, Chris, what did you tell your sons? You have 3 sons. You have a daughter and you have a grandson. What did you tell your children?
Well, I had to sit with it for a moment first, because if I had told them the first time I saw it, I would have responded with anger, and in my anger, I probably would have perpetuated something that actually contributes to this cycle of hate and oppression. So I sat with it for a minute, but then I talked with Tina. Hey, I'm going to show the boys this particular this incident, and so I brought him in, And I shared this story, but I put it on my Xbox. And they didn't know what was happening. They didn't know if we was going to play 2K20 like we do at night. But I said, I'm going to show you guys something, and what you're going to see, I know I'm putting it on my Xbox console, but what you're going to experience is no video game. It's not Fortnite. It's not something where a person can come back from it. It's real. And I sat there and I played it. I didn't tell them. I wanted them to see it for themselves. And it was a long version and I said this, I don't know how many parents has ever experienced your child's innocence leave them, or a portion of it, but I'm gonna tell you that's probably one of the most terrible, awful things you can see, and especially if you're the one that's exposing them to it. And I watched them with horror on their face. I watched Joey double over. I watched Jaden just like he's perplexed. Watching for 10 minutes a man murder another man in the name of the law. And so they kept saying, this is not real. Dad, I can't believe this. How did he get away with this? Here was the thing. I didn't have real answers for it. Like, I'm their father. I'm supposed to be able to provide them with clarity and with answers. But me being an African-American man in America, I'm having to say, I really don't have an answer for how a man can hear people crying and saying he cannot breathe. You can hear the man crying and say, I cannot breathe. But you, in your arrogance, it doesn't even resonate. Yeah. I had no explanation for that. And it wasn't a game. So what I had to do, and this is the beauty of our life, is I teach my kids not on a race or case by case. I teach them as it pertains to humanity. Okay? I said, now listen, that is a bad cop. That is a bad human. But what I don't want you to do is think that every white cop is a bad person. Or begin to struggle with, are all white people bad? Because is Uncle Mark bad? Right. Uncle Tommy, Uncle Timmy? How about Papa? And so I'm having to paint it in a broad stroke so that they don't be so like completely confused by it.
Well, yeah, and in our home we're striving, continue to strive to teach them it's not just black and white. No, this is what we call justice and injustice. Just making sure that they understand it even beyond color to the humanity of the situation.
Right.
Yeah, so that was my framework for it. But I wish I could tell you that it was so politically correct and I dotted every I and crossed every T to pertain. I really didn't have real answers for the questions they were asking.
And it's an ongoing, it has to be an ongoing conversation. And it is in our home.
Yeah. Absolutely. Mark, tell us, did you talk to your children? Or have they talked to you?
Yeah, I think it was, it's been different for us as far as a conversation that probably a lot of Caucasian people might have with their kids versus us. And I think what Chris alluded to is, my kids have only known this platform, this diversity. And so, we had recently just let our daughter get on Instagram for a couple hours a day. And I called Lana kind of in a panic the day of or the day after. I had been so kind of like a lot of people just processing how I felt about it and, what that looked like. When it actually happened, I was at a storage shed getting some shirts out that I had stored, and I was kind of like Tina. I had saw a couple of images pop up on my phone, and I physically stopped and made myself watch it. And I remember there were other people walking by me getting their stuff, and I had sunglasses on, but I was just visibly crying. And a client of mine called me, and I don't know why I did it, but I answered his call. He's probably 65, African-American bishop, and I shouldn't have answered the call, but I just called, and his first response was, "Hello, Brother Jeffrey," and I just started bawling on the phone. And he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, I'm not." And I just told him what I had just watched, and we chatted for a minute because he was a little older. His point of reference was completely different. He had seen a lot of stuff that I hadn't seen. And so I had called you right after that call with him, and we did, the video. But probably a day after that, that had all happened, I called Lana in a panic. I said, "Oh my God, Kenzie's on Instagram. And I know she saw this." And I'm grateful for Lana is very proactive, and she had already started those conversations. But I think it's a little different for us. I was asking Kenzie on the way over here, I said, "Kenzie, do you ever remember us having like a conversation about race? Like, did we ever like say, hey, this is how you're supposed to act?" And she looked at me like an alien. And she goes, "No." And I go, "Do you ever remember us having to do that?" And she said, "No." And she goes, I don't think we'd have to have that talk because it's just who our family is." She said, I hope this makes you chuckle. This is about Chris's, how big his physique is. But she said, "My Uncle Buddy is a really big black man, and he loves me and takes care of me."
No.
And,
Chris is Uncle Buddy.
yeah, Chris is Uncle
For all
Buddy.
of you that don't know, he's
Sorry
Uncle
that you're not
Buddy.
as big, Travis. You didn't get mentioned. But I felt like in that instance, like I just said, I know a lot of parents, probably even Caucasian, are having difficult conversations with their kids because they probably weren't exposed to anything until a catastrophe like this happens.
Yeah.
And that saddens me. And
Yeah.
I'm also extremely grateful for this because our kids don't have that experience.
Can I say real quick that us being brought up, the black community was our community. So we were raised in it. So when all of this started happening way back, even when you bring up Trayvon Martin, even I'm sure before that, but I didn't, as a white woman married to a black man, I didn't think, we weren't taught, we didn't have that conversation. And so if I could be honest, I'm sitting here thinking, how do you have this conversation? There wasn't you didn't teach us that because we didn't have to know it. But we've talked to our kids about it, but I think it's difficult because they don't see it. And it's like you literally have to show them the video. You have to, especially with biracial kids, to me it's a little different because they see both 24/7 in the house. And so, it's just a conversation that I'm trying to still maneuver my way through because I don't have the plan. I didn't have a plan laid out, before me for that.
Yeah.
I want to just piggyback on what Nina said because I've always taught my kids, raising them up, and we have continual conversations at times when it's needed about unfairness and injustice and bullying and abuse of power, what is not okay. I talk with them all the time about, right is right and wrong is wrong. This was so incredibly different because it started for my kids, I think, with Ahmaud Arbery, because while we've had conversations from time to time about regardless of a race, regardless of a special need, regardless of their economic status, you do not treat people this way. No one is ever less than you. And so those conversations have been an ongoing conversation as I've just been raising my kids. But for them to see injustice in the form of just murder has been, to go back to what Chris said, has been hard to see some of that innocence leaving your kids when it's one thing to say you do not disrespect or treat someone or talk or make jokes about someone because of a special need that they have, or because of this or because of that. But then this has taken the conversation to a whole new level, which has been, like Nina said, it's been tough to navigate. I know Mackenzie, when she first saw the video with me, one of the things that she said, like, that stuck out to me was, and he just has his hand in his pocket. Mm-hmm. And I felt like for her, like the first thing that she has been taught her whole life is empathy. And that was the first thing that jumped up out of her, was the lack of empathy. The lack of empathy for a human being being dehumanized, being murdered.
Yeah.
And so that's been gut-wrenching to have that and to hear, for your kids to hear that. However, I will not shield them. They're at an age, they're at an appropriate age. I think age is a matter of discussion, and that goes for anyone's home. But there are some things that some little kids, they don't need to be exposed to yet. I think our kids are old enough to where I will not shield them from this. I wanted them to see the video of Ahmaud. I wanted them to see the video of George Floyd, because I need them to know this is, back to, I think it was Joseph's point, like, this is reality. This is actually what happened. We cannot be in denial of it, and we can't be in denial of conversations with our kids.
Yeah.
For me, it's interesting to hear how Kenzie was born into this interracial, multicultural environment. But for me, I was engrafted in. And so when the Lord led me to the river in Durham at the time, North Carolina, because I was raised in an all-black community, I attended an all-black high school, and then I went to an all-black college. So my experience had been very unique in that, not so much unique for black people, but unique in that the scope of my friendships, relationships, aspirations, and goals were shaped by blacks in the African American community. And then I heard this voice, which from the radio, I assumed was that of a black woman. And it wasn't. And so I came to this church, sat in the balcony, and was there for about a good solid 6 months. And February rolled around, and one night, we started singing the Black National Anthem, the Negro National Anthem. And I felt like somebody let our secret out. Like, how do they know our song? I mean, like stanzas 1, 2, and like I can't even get through. I don't even know our song that well. Lift every voice and sing. I'm like, every voice. It does say every, but I didn't. You don't really mean every voice, like. And so there was something. Bishop teaches a lesson about enlarged by exposure, and I had never been exposed to a group of white people that I could actually trust. And it broke something over me because all of my exposure had been in my community, and there was an inherent distrust for those out of my community. And if anything, I would try to find maybe somebody I could get along with, or I could be their cool black friend. But to find a family that had invested their life in this community with authenticity, without any reward, without any prize, had just done it because it was their nature. So for Nina to say we were just raised, we didn't have to be taught like that black person. We didn't have to be taught appreciate that black woman because it was just a part of their nature. And so this DNA, this culture, it was very different for me, and it was something I had to constantly remind myself I'm in a safe place. Because as a black man, I've never called the police in my life. I was never taught to trust that as an authority figure. In the black community, we handle things brother to brother. Oh, I'm gonna go talk to him, or I'm gonna go deal with that. because we would rather deal with our own situations. We talk about crime in the black community, but a lot of times it's us handling our issues internally, because when we seek outside counsel, it's not safe. Outside authority, it's not safe. And so God brought me into a place, in a space, where I learned to trust and learn the difference between whiteness and white supremacy and white people.
That's good, Joseph.
That they weren't one and the same.
Talk about that.
That I learned that just as I didn't want to be judged by the color of my skin, I couldn't make presumptions of someone else based on the color of their skin. That there was a willingness to walk in this community and walk hand in hand with us. Pastor Brady's brother-in-law, Pastor Tom, I told them the other day on our Grief and Loss call, I said, that's one man who will cry with you.
Yes.
I mean, he will cry and he will cry. And there was something about his tears that was healing for me, because I had never known that a white person would care that much about what I was dealing with. I think my uncle had passed, and he prayed with me after a service. And it was a small action on his part. It was just him doing his normal thing, but it was meaningful for me. And I had to embrace the safety of a different environment and a culture that I was used to, not disparaging either one, just learning that this was new. I wasn't raised like Kenzie. I always, I saw color. I saw how we were treated as children when we would compete in scholastic. I didn't go to the football. I didn't compete in football. But when we ever had a scholastic Olympiad, junior Olympiad, no, I was doing stuff like building model planes out of pieces of paper. I mean, I was really smart. But there was just a distinction. When we left that competition, the lady, Patty Kubicek, I hate that I called her name, came on our bus and said, hey guys, you want these tomatoes and potatoes to take home to your mamas? And my teacher said, did you ask the other children on their buses if they needed potatoes and tomatoes? Like, no, we probably did need them, somebody may have. But there was just disparity, and we won. No matter how smart or brilliant we were, there was always a difference. So I had to learn to trust that this was a safe place. And over the years, there's another story I could tell, but over the years, Pastor Brady, Bishop have proven to me that this was a place that I could trust.
I'm gonna put this in real quick. Jotted it down in some notes. I can't reap from you your gifting, your talent, what you bring to the table, and refuse to bleed with you. And I think that's what, if I can step over the barrier into Black America, I think that's a possibility of the way they viewed white America. As long as you make us look good, as long as you sing and create the atmosphere, since we're dealing with church, you sing, you create the atmosphere, you play, you create an atmosphere. For me to step into, or pastor, to step into being white, how can I take advantage of your gifting and not understand, at least try to understand through conversation, your deepest pain, not just surface disagreement. And we all have surface disagreements, but to understand how deep this goes, and you've inherited something that you didn't ask for. You didn't ask God to be black when you entered the earth, or to be white when you entered the earth. And because you're black, you inherited those things, those abuses, those challenges and struggles that Black America or African America has went through and experienced. So again, I can't read from you.
But people do it all the time. People do it all the time,
Absolutely.
especially in the church.
Absolutely.
Because they will have African American singers, and they do want that atmosphere, and they want that. But I'm gonna tell you what's different is that we do life together. We don't just do church together. We do life together. And I say that because, I'm just gonna say this, but Bishop and myself, actually, this man right here is a disruptor, okay? I am a peacemaker, and I grew up in the same house, living in the same neighborhood my whole life, and then he came into my life, and I didn't know to call him a disruptor, because we didn't use that word back then, but now that I look at it, that's what he is. And that's what he was, that's what he is, and that's what he always shall be. I'm thoroughly convinced of that. But my husband always had this little edge on him. He was, before blow dryers ever came out, he blow dried his hair because he would turn the heat on and get in the floor and hold his hair under the vent. And he would dry his hair like that. Now that's just in the natural. But he also had an ear to hear God. And he was never content to just follow a religious system. And he always bucked at that. And I'm always a peacemaker. But I'm grateful for the fact that he bucked at it. And he would always challenge people. But because of that, we were viewed as disruptors. And because we were viewed as disruptors, we pretty much didn't fit into the white community when it came to church. And so to be totally honest, we felt rejected by the white community when it came to church. And we actually felt devastated on many levels because of his progressive ear to hear God. And, you know, people didn't understand why we got to do praise, why we got to do worship. Why can't we just sing page 333 and page 417? But we were always hungry for more. And I'm not saying that white people are not hungry for more, but in the era that we were coming through, we were kind of the ones that were reaching out for more. And because of that, you get labeled. And we were considered troublemakers, but we weren't troublemakers. We were just hungry. We just wanted God. We wanted destiny. We wanted purpose. And because of the rejection that we felt, we were distraught. And it was the African American community that opened up to us. And they invited us in their homes, and they invited us to their churches, and they showed us love. I learned sacrificial giving in the African American church. I learned praise. I learned worship. I learned how to be free. I learned that it was okay to just lift my hands and hug my brothers and my sisters, and to hear people preach until I really would fall under the pew. We learned that was all okay. And it was in our pain that the African American church reached out and drew us in and basically said, if you don't fit there, you can fit right here. And we lived our life, the latter half of our life. That's where we lived. That's where we raised our children. That's what we knew. And it was because we had a disruptor who was saying, if we don't fit here, it's okay. We will fit somewhere. And that's the story of us doing life together. And so people say, how does a white woman pastor a 95% African American church? Because we do life together. And people climb over barriers. Potter's House North climbs over barriers every week to say that woman is my pastor, that man is my bishop. They climb over those, y'all climb over barriers, and we will always realize what you have had to climb over to pull your chair up to our table. But at the same time, we are not just allies in the kingdom. We are brothers. We are sisters. Yes. And as my children grew up in this community, They dated young men in this community. They married two of the best in this community. Atlanta got one of the best white ones, I'll tell you that right now. And we've got some of the most beautiful grandchildren in the world. And when I saw George Floyd on the ground, I said, that could be my grandson. And I knew I had to do more than what I'd always done. I knew I had to take it to another level. When I heard the man cry and nobody answered his call, I decided at that moment I will raise my voice so that everybody will know that this is not just black and this is not just white. This is just wrong. This is plain wrong. This is not human. And it's got to change. It's got to change, and this voice right here will be a part of that change. I don't know what all the change looks like, but I'm open to learn it. I'm open to learn what can I do to help bring about the change. Travis, what does change look like?
Well, I mean, change comes in the form of a disruption. What happens in America, you talked about whiteness. Whiteness is a social construct that simply says, I am, I will, and always will be better than you. And inside of that social construct, you do have white people, but it must be also distinguished that all white people don't represent whiteness.
Yeah.
Because there are people who say, I recognize who you are, I recognize that there may be some differences, but we have more in common than we do have in difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what ends up happening, what we are actually seeing right now, the diversity of the protests, the diversity of happening, is because the only way change happens in America is through disruption.
Yeah.
The only way that you have TSA, the only way that we have all this terrorist organizations and task force, why? Is because we had a terrorist, we had 9/11.
Yeah.
The only way that change happens, especially when it comes to racial identity, is that white folks have to breach the system.
Wow.
They have to say, this is not okay.
Yeah.
Enough is enough.
Enough is
White people have to turn on the very system that says you are a priority or you will receive a loan, right? Over in years times past and in some areas that you will receive a home loan and you will be a recipient of the GI Bill, but the same person who serves in the Army or the Navy, they can't be a recipient of the GI Bill or, own a home or do whatever, that they don't have the same rights as you may have. You have to have white folks who stand up and say, guess what? This is not okay.
Yeah.
We won't get it right. We don't always get it right. We may not have the verbiage to say it correctly or politically correct. But what we have to say is that Black Lives Matters. What we have to say is that, guess what? This is wrong.
It's wrong.
And the only way that we can evoke change, and that's what is so, I'm an optimistic type of person. I try to find the good in everything. But the reality of it is that maybe we're living in a monumental moment, just as though Emmett Till's mother, they asked her, do you want a closed casket or an open casket? And she says, I want the world to see. And as horrifying as it is,
we have to see.
It's the perfect storm. 30 million plus people are unemployed right now.
Yeah.
The world is stopped. And now, unfortunately, we have this death that occurs that is a perpetual sign of the systemic racism that is yet still in our culture. And so what we have to have not just allies, we have to have white folks to say, as a matter of fact, can I press it a little further? I'm even sick of the idea of white community and black community. This is all, if this is a human race, this is our community. This is not those sides of the streets and this side of the streets. It's like, I am my brother's keeper. Cain and Abel, I don't know what the pigmentation of their skin. One could have been lighter, one could have been darker. But we have to simply say, I am my brother's keeper. Just because he has a different skin tone doesn't make him not my brother. He is just as human as I am. And for so long, black people in America have just been trying to simply prove this idea that we are enough. You can look that we are equal, that we should have equal rights, we should have equal privileges, we have the same voice, we put on our pants just the same way. And all we're asking for is for you to respect us the way our God respects us.
That's what I think.
He didn't create us differently. He created us uniquely the same.
I just want to interject
sorry,
real quick. No, I love that, but I think that a picture paints 1,000 words. I believe that what we saw with Mr. Floyd and that the Caucasian, the officer that was on him, it was a true depiction of what black people have been trying to do for centuries. Just get off of me. I'm crying out. I'm crying out through the civil rights movement. I'm equal. Get up off of me. I'm equal. Let me breathe. It was a perfect metaphor that America was forced to look at. And I will say this, you cannot unsee what you have seen. And what this is causing us to do as a country is we are getting to this thing called critical mass. It happened right before apartheid, and it's where the oppressor and the oppressed lock arms together and say, like Travis said, enough is enough.
Let me throw this in here and you continue. I put in the notes, you can't correct or adjust silence. And even though I may not say it always correct or always right, we have to look beyond the limited understanding and know the heart of a person and feel that it's okay to talk and to have the conversation without being judged. Tell me how you feel you're viewed without being judged. And you cannot adjust or correct silence. And I believe this is the critical mass that you're talking about. There's always turbulence before transition. We talked about being interrupters. There's always turbulence. Travis, you talked about the perfect storm. I believe in the sovereignty of God, maybe to an extent that some may not see it or understand it. I don't care what evil is going on in the earth, God is still God. God's in charge, God's in control. He knows the end from the beginning, and he stages seasons because of the outcome. If we lean in this together and not call it a white march, a black march, or protest, but if we lean in this together, we're going to come out together, and no one's going to be on the top of one another. But God is going to bring a balanced equality out of this struggle. And I don't want to be a prophet of doom here, but it's going to get worse before it gets better. It's got to get to a point, a boiling point, tipping point. And at that tipping point, God is evaluating hearts. And if hearts of either side, of either color, of either race, if that's not right, God is going to lean into it until we give God the right answer. Not until God gives us the right answer. God is God. God is who you are in your skin tone. God is who I am in my skin tone. God is who you are in your gender and in my gender, our race and your race. He is God. And if God doesn't get out of what he is purposed for in this season, God will take it again some other place, to another extent, to another dimension, until we all can breathe equality.
Yeah. Bishop, you mentioned the thing about silence, and I want to tell what a lot of people don't understand about the social construct about whiteness is whiteness is perceived as silent but yet still in control. So the reason why certain people are silent is because
they feel they know how it's going to come out anyway.
They already know. So legislation laws already caters to this idea, right?
So whiteness says, give you your space to protest.
Oh yeah,
give you your
go ahead.
space. We back up, tear it up, tear the streets up,
tear it up,
because that's who you are anyway.
Yeah.
And once you get tired of tearing up what you want to tear up, burn up what you want to burn up, everything will go back to the status quo of what it was to begin with.
Because in America, if you watch any of these moments in history, from Rodney King, from different things as such, most of the time, the cops that are blatantly beating people, kill people, right? The whole idea of lynching, they're never found to be criminal, because to be found criminal means I have to adjust the law.
Right. Wow.
Right.
But, right, there's no hate crime. So but here's the other part of it. But most of the time you get civil damages. So I can take you, even though you never went to prison, I can sue you. I can sue the city, I can sue the state, I can sue whoever, and they usually will settle out of court.
And keep things moving.
Why? And so the reason why people are in such an uproar right now and the reason why the charges are such a huge deal, because people understand the only way that you can shift the course of systemic racism that is found and embedded in politics, the only way it changes is there has to be a criminal charge, and it has to be found guilty in order to adjust laws.
Right.
Because whiteness is embedded. So here's the other part about whiteness. And I'm not talking about white people, I'm talking about the social construct of whiteness, who simply means I am better than you and I will always be smarter than you.
Right.
I can be silent, and watch this, and I can be ignorant. So I build my life away from you to escape the reality that is happening to you.
True, so true.
So I build my life. I don't watch the news. I see it. I'm never going to put Black Lives Matter up there. Certain pastors will never put it up there. They will never be a part of the reconciliation move, because the farther I am removed from you, I can play dumb.
They play just enough to be politically correct and not completely ostracized, but they're not going to risk their life or their status for someone that's in pain.
But this is why critical mass is important.
That's what happens. Yeah.
It is now being made, it's unpopular to be silent.
Yes.
See, before you can hide behind your silence.
Absolutely.
You didn't have to use your platform.
Wow.
You can pastor a mega church and never say anything. But the world now has turned and is looking for, you're not saying nothing?
Right.
We got you, you're a marked
you.
man.
Right.
So critical mass is calling. Now you have to acknowledge, not all lives matter.
And it can't be
Black
temporary.
lives matter, and you got to be okay with saying that, and I got to be okay with losing some folk.
Yep, absolutely.
So now you got the oppressor again locking arms with the oppressed, saying we're going to change this whole thing. We won't stop until it changes. I promise you, that's why you are seeing protests in Paris.
Right.
London.
All around the world, I will say this for systematic oppression, and I know we're going to get into legislative things, but I just want to say time's up.
Time is up. Yeah, that's
Like,
yes.
I ain't trying to be prophetic, but I'm just calling it time's up. You can't hide behind silence. No more. Everybody is speaking out against it. Everybody is holding people accountable.
Yes.
So time's up.
Time is up. It's got to.
You got whole police department saying, you gonna just suspend them too? No. All of us are sitting down.
Yes.
Name a time in history when that's happened. That's where we are. That's why I'm pessimistic by nature. But this has caused me to be very optimistic because I'm looking at it and saying, this is something totally different. And while the biggest problem was looking at the man on George's neck saying, yeah, you got him, that's a good one. I am looking at this and that was the worst thing you could have ever done, because the day you did that, everything changed in America.
Yes, Lord.
George became a sign. He became a symbol. He became irrefutable proof that this thing we were trying to ignore, this Goliath that was taunting the black community, and it maybe the tone of it felt like it was only hitting our community, but it was a part of all of us. We just were failing to acknowledge it. And Travis gave a great example. I heard him yesterday talking about how sometimes when there's things going on under your house and your septic tank, you don't always fully appreciate what's happening until there's a break. And when there's a break in that septic system and you start to realize that stuff you were flushing and ignoring and stuffing and it just starts, you don't want that mess in your face. The unfortunate part is that for some of us, this mess has been our reality. This mess has been the way my mom had to tell me to interact with police as a high school student because I was big and tall then. It was the way that I had to live my life going to college, being told not to get stopped in certain cities between Huntsville, Alabama and Birmingham, Alabama, not to let the sun go down in certain cities. It was a part of my reality. It was a part of the sewage system of my life that was every day for me. But it was something about when this happened, like Chris said, like Bishop said, you know, we always think of things coming from the heavens into the earth as in the form of miracles, or we always think of signs in the form of supernatural things. But sometimes a sign is just an irrefutable, undeniable moment in time that causes everybody to stop and pay attention. And this has been a sign. Like Chris said, if you wanted to be quiet, you could, but now we have a sign. And this sign is saying not just that Black Lives Matter, but that we will not sit by any longer and let systematic oppression and let people in high places abuse their power any longer. It's a sign that for some of us has revealed old wounds. I mean, there have been men crying. I've talked to fathers, I've talked to men this week that have shed so many tears because this unearthed a problem that they had tried to avoid, but it's a sign for everybody. And when that sign, when this thing is lifted up, when this thing is seen, when we reach this critical mass, no one is able to deny anymore the need for radical change. And it starts by having conversations like this. It starts by building churches like this. It starts by being willing to say, I refuse to not have diversity in my church, in my business. I will not use people as cattle. I will not use football players and basketball players for entertainment, but not listen to the cries of their people. I will not pay them millions of dollars in a contract, but get mad when they kneel for a flag. They refuse to kneel for a flag that they don't feel represents them. I will change the way I do things. This has been a sign, and I am grateful to be alive in a time that I realized when my parents were born in the 50s, had they grown into adulthood, unless legislation changed, they wouldn't have been allowed. The Voters' Right Act happened in 1965. Distance distorts. My mom was born in 58. My dad was born in 56. As a black man in America, he was born in a time that had he matured without legal change, he would not have been able to vote. We're living in a time of change. And I'm looking forward to seeing what laws are in place that stops things from this happening again.
So that's the action steps, and that's what this requires. Because Bishop Jakes was on CNN the other day, and he said that the march was only the entry point. So what are some things that we can do now? I know that, well, I'll tell you what I did this week. I looked at my voter's registration card and I realized I have moved within the last year, and I realized that it was different from the address that was on my driver's license. Well, I thought when I went to get my license changed that I told them that I wanted my voter's registration changed as well. And I never got the card in the mail. So when I called them to ask about it, they said, oh, your voting has been suspended. Wow. And so I immediately said, well, what do I do to change that? And they talked me through the process, and that's what we have to, this is where real change takes place. We have got to make sure that we got to be committed to voting. We've got to be committed first to voter registration. We got to be committed to voting. We got to be committed to say, yes, I'll pick people up if I have to and take them to the polls, whatever it takes. I'm not going to let anybody say I didn't have a ride to the poll. We are going to make sure that we can do those things right there. That's part of our action steps. Somebody else, give me some other ones.
I put down 3 things: expose early, exchange experience, and exercise empathy.
Okay, tell me what that means.
Expose early. You talked about talking to the kids and the children, and CNN this morning, like they've been doing for several weeks on Saturday morning. I forget what show it's called, but they talk to the children about Sesame Street. Yeah, and I heard it when I woke up this morning. They're explaining this. Wow. So you expose early. Number 2, what was it? Exchange experiences, and that's what a little bit of what we're doing now.
Absolutely.
It's conversation. Pastor was talking about how that we started, and when I moved to Detroit, and we connected and met. My dad was pastoring predominantly all-white church in the suburbs of Detroit. You lived in the inner city of Detroit. You always say destiny don't leave clues. Destiny leaves clues. And also destiny don't always come with an explanation. Yeah. It's something that you can't explain. I'll never forget my people that was around my father and different ones, relatives. After we connected and we started, I went to my father's church on Sunday, but anytime there was churches in the inner city of Detroit, black churches predominantly, that were having special meetings, that's where our dates were.
That's where we dated.
We dated in black churches. Yep. And then when I was called, when I accepted that, we started out traveling, one of the fathers, the generals that's already passed, by the name of Bishop Quander Wilson, I'll never forget preaching for him in his little church in Columbus, Ohio. That time he was covering Bishop Jakes, which was Elder Jakes in those days. And I'll never forget, after I preached for the first time on a Thursday night to a handful of people, Bishop Wilson took me in the back and said these words to me: boy, you belongs to my peoples. Now you're going to stick with me, and I'm going to walk you through the black church, because you belongs to my peoples.
Could it be because you had a Jerry curl? Can we talk about that?
Well, this is crazy, but Bishop Wilson would teach me how to walk in. He taught me what to wear. He even talked about my hair. Boy, don't cut that hair now. You got that perm in the back now. My peoples love it. When you get, curls, you get the curls in the back. And he said, my peoples love it when you preach. And that hair gets to flowing. My peoples love it. And so I was trying to get a Jerry curl. I didn't know exactly how to do it. But I tried. But he would tell me, wear these boots tonight. Literally, he would come by my hotel room, because I traveled a lot with him in those days, different conferences. He was the one that introduced me to Carlton and Azusa. In the first Azusa I went to, I'm sitting on the platform, and you couldn't get on that stage. I'm sitting on the platform behind a Bishop Carlton Pearson, Bishop Morton, Bishop Quander Wilson, and the list goes on. Bishop Patterson, all of them are there. And I'm there, we're there, simply because this man was the bridge. and he prophesied over us, you belong to my peoples. I didn't understand all that he was saying. I didn't comprehend where this would lead us. But look at us today. When we started the church in Raleigh, we didn't go on the radio and announce we're opening the doors for African American. That's just what happened. When we came here, it wasn't that. That's just what happened because it's destiny. And one thing you cannot do is play destiny. You cannot fight against destiny because if you take it to that corner, God's going to come around in a different direction, bring you back onto the course of purpose because of divine destiny. So we expose early, we exchange experience, and we exercise empathy.
Say it again. We
Exercise empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Bishop, I think too was really, really powerful. And I know that we have some things in terms of politics, of voting and different things like that. But I would just admonish people to really just listen. Slow down and listen to people. Mm-hmm. Like, hear their stories. I think you kind of alluded to it as well.
It's exchange experiences.
It's really just listen and just say, you're not just how are you doing, man. How were you raised? Like, tell me, I want to know your story. I want to know your journey. And everybody's not a conversationalist, but at the same time, it's like really, really to understand where people are. You got to understand where they've been. And Bishop, I'll tell you, the other thing that I feel like we have to have is that we have to have other people standing up for other people. I'll never forget, if I can share this, I'll condense it to
it's all right, take your time.
40 seconds. But, in Raleigh, I was your armor bearer. And we went to Georgetown. And, you love to shop. And, you love to shop. And
back in the day.
I'll back in the day. And so I'll never forget pulling up to Georgetown. It was my first time ever being in that district. It was my first, this is like a first time. I've never been to a 5-star hotel. Holiday Inn was my first hotel. I thought I was living big, family reunion, going to the Holiday Inn, and they had a swimming pool on the inside.
You went with me to D.C. that same trip, and we stayed at the Ritz-Carlton where the church hosted us, put us. And
Don't
we're
tell my
there,
business.
So they bring the menu, and they give Travis a menu, give me a menu. I'm just sitting there. And what was it you ordered?
Pate.
And I said, man, do you know what this is?
And you let me order it.
Yeah, but no, I didn't let you order it.
Oh, yeah.
But going back to Georgetown.
No, what I was saying is that I'll never forget going into that shoe store. You had already been inside, and you were
shopping there for years.
And you've been shopping there for years. And I pulled the car down. You got out. Was already in. I went to go park the vehicle, and when I came in, the guy, I knew something was not right because the guy was looking at me funny. And I put my hands on the shoe, and he says, don't touch it if you ain't going to
Number one, he wasn't even white American.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't.
But he owned
white.
that store.
And I didn't even really, it didn't even register me like he was talking to me. I just knew that it just was weird. But because Bishop was there, kind of, he put the shoes up, and the guy just was looking at me strange. And
So he didn't know you guys were together.
he didn't know we were together.
Okay.
And I went over to Bishop. I said, this guy told me, it's like, if I ain't going to buy it, don't touch it. And I'll never forget, you turned around, you looking at it and says, hey, what are you talking about? Not touching the shoe, like, he's a disruptor.
Yes.
And he said, you know what?
Because I made a scene. I wanted to make a scene.
And you said, hey, I ain't buying these shoes. I'm not buying these shoes. No, you got to buy the shoes. No, my friend, you're my friend.
Holy man of
Holy
God.
man. I was like, I'm not your friend.
When Bishop comes in these stores, he says, I'm come to bless you. When he walks in.
But this whole idea of the fact is, I knew what was happening in that moment.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what needed to happen, but what you did was you breached that system and said, and I'll never forget, You said, man, I'm not buying these shoes. I'm not buying whatever. We're leaving. Travis, let's go. And you said, and you looked at that man, he says, in all these years, I just never known you to be this way.
And all the people I brought to him.
All the people I brought to him, I've never known you to be this way. But I know one thing, I'm never going to buy another pair of shoes from you.
Right, and that's what you have to do. Yeah.
And so we need people that when they see certain things, we need people to stand up and say, that's not okay.
Because that's
leveraging,
that's not okay. He leveraged his privilege.
Right.
That's exactly what happened. And that's what we all must do.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not enough to feel guilty or to feel bad, because it is like, no, I think it was at the protest the other day, one of the guys, it's not enough for us to acknowledge white privilege and privilege. It's like whenever you see it transpiring, you call it out.
Absolutely.
You know, if you're seeing somebody else giving you a break that they wouldn't give the African American or the Hispanic or another race, or they're serving you first, don't take advantage of it. No, you need to call it out immediately. It's when all of us begin to get in this fight and to fight back on that oppression.
And guilty and feeling bad is not a strategy.
No.
You
get over your guilt.
It doesn't do anything. Because what America wants, I see the oppression. You feel guilty. If there's any humanity there at all, you sense that. But then we retreat, back up, and don't say anything, safety to our safety zone, because of the risk of what it's going to cost us. But the kingdom has to come.
Come on.
And this is where we are now. We're in the transition, the overlapping period between the church and the kingdom. The strength of the kingdom has overlapped the age that we're standing in. Each one represents a magnetic force. And the closer they come together, the more turbulence there is until the lesser is swallowed up by the greater.
That's good.
And that's where we are right now. Out of this will come the kingdom of God, established in the earth. There's where authority is. It confuses hell to the place of retreat, because we don't know who to fight. It was earlier when you were talking about Job, and it reminded me that the Bible declared that Satan, if he had only known, impossible. He don't know the end from the beginning. He didn't know the outcome of the crucifixion. He didn't know what would happen in the resurrection. If he would have known, he would have never crucified our Lord and Savior, because now he don't have one Christ, he don't have one man, but out of that resurrection comes a many-membered man, the body of Christ, and that's what we're seeing come into fruition now. If Satan would have known what that man with his knee in the neck of another man, holding him until he lost his life, he would have never in a million years. He would that white man would have been in church that morning. He would have been in a Catholic church somewhere. Absolutely. If he had only known, because out of that has come an international revolt that is not going to retreat until there's complete restoration.
Hallelujah.
It's the kingdom of God. It's the kingdom of God.
And it's a people that we're not a people. We're not black, we're not white, we're not bond, we're not free, we're not male, we're not female, but we are the people of God. And that's what is happening. That's the kingdom. My Lord. Bishop.
Pastor, I just wanted to thank you for this conversation. You're a disruptor, but you're also a trailblazer. And there are many people who look to you maybe silently and see the path you're taking. And this is the kingdom of God. I didn't learn that the kingdom was multicultural until I joined this ministry, because my life had been defined by one lane and one avenue. But not only have you had this conversation with us as your staff and your children, I consider myself your child.
Yes, you are.
I call myself Joseph Branthony. You know, it's like Brady Anthony. But not only have you had this conversation with us, but you took time to spend 2 hours talking to our entire staff, comprised of Hispanic, Black, white, 3 hours just allowing us to pour our hearts out. From that conversation, exchanging empathy, we learned that there's a freedom rider in our staff that had to integrate Ole Miss, stood against racism in college. Then there was a lady on our staff who works in finance who integrated a 3rd grade elementary school, and she witnessed a race riot and saw, we would have never known unless we embraced empathy, exercised empathy. And because this is your nature, I've had the benefit of knowing it in secret and in part because of my personal relationship with you. But for whatever reason, God has aligned this situation where now the world will know that in your heart, in your hearts, is the capacity not just to be a silent supporter, but to be a disruptor. Wow. And I thank God for you.
Let me tell you something. This is what the kingdom looks like. This is Jesus. He's not black, he's not white, we're not bond, we're not free. But this is what Christianity does. Christianity not only says I'm my brother's keeper, but if I show up in a store and you mistreat my brother, I speak up because that's my brother. We call it out. And I want to challenge every person that is out there, that wherever you are, if you're white, speak up. If you're black, speak up. If you're brown, speak up. Because it's not just about black and white, okay? It is at this moment. But ultimately what God wants to have happen is that the people who were not a people from every race, every tribe, every kindred, every tongue, begin to take their rightful place. It's the kingdom of light that is overpowering the kingdom of darkness. We sing about it all the time. Pushing back the darkness. Hello, that is what we're doing. This is what pushing back the darkness really looks like. It's more than lyrics. It's more than music. It's more than a beat. It's more than a song. It is a people that have said enough is enough, and we're calling for things to change in America. This is what change looks like. I challenge you to be your brother's keeper, to open your mouth, to speak up, because it is time for a change. We're going to do this again. We're going to come back. There's so much to cover. There's so much to talk about. And we've already taken enough of your time today, but I want to say thank you to all of you for pouring out your heart here today. And I don't know if anybody wants to say anything else, but I don't want to shut it down. If you got anything that you feel like you got to say. Bishop, anything else? You're good. So let me close today just encouraging you to not just talk about the change, but be the change. Be the change in your neighborhood. Do life with people that don't look like you. Just be the change. Whenever you see injustice, open your mouth and declare that's wrong. Wrong is wrong, right is right. Here's the good thing that we got going for us. The Bible says that the Son of Righteousness will arise with healing in his wings. And that's what we're praying for, is that God would cover this earth with healing. Not just America, but I'm talking about the nations of the world. We are the people of God. If real change is going to come, it's going to come right here from the church. Come on, church, let's stand up, let's arise, let's shine. And everywhere we go, shine for Jesus. Can we just say that together? I feel like I've had to say that every Sunday by myself. Come on, say it with me. Shine, Lord. Woo! We love you, Potter's House North. We love you. Be blessed.